What if the very act of working wasn't just about, getting tasks done or climbing a ladder, but was fundamentally designed to help you become a better, more capable human being?
Huh.
And here's the twist. What if that relentless focus on personal growth was the reason the company was wildly successful?
It sounds kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it? We usually think of business as one thing and personal development as another, maybe something you do on the side if you have time.
Exactly. Because today we're diving into something much deeper than, say, standard training programs or, the usual employee perks.
Right.
This deep dive is all about the concept of an everyone culture and these organizations called Deliberately Developmental Organizations, or DDOs.
Yeah, DDOs.
Yeah,
These are workplaces where the development of the individual and the success of the business aren't really seen as separate goals at all.
they're unified.
Yeah, unified. They're all one thing, as the sources put it.
Right, and that's really the core insight from the source material we've been digging into. We've got articles and research looking at this, well, pretty radical idea. How some unique companies are putting it into pretty intense practice and the profound results they're seeing for both the people and the bottom line.
And what the sources seem to show is that these aren't just successful companies that, happen to value development.
Yeah.
It's more like their development focus is integral to how they succeed.
Okay, so our mission today is basically to unpack what a DDO truly is, try to understand why this approach might be becoming almost essential in today's economy.
Yeah.
Look at some fascinating examples. Companies like NextJump, Decurion, Bridgewater see the real nitty-gritty of how this works.
Get into the specifics.
Exactly. And most importantly, figure out what any of this might mean for you, whether you actually work in such a place or, maybe not.
Okay, so let's start by defining a DDO. The fundamental principle, as we said, is that business success and individual development are fused. They are all one thing.
And that immediately feels like a massive departure from the norm. Most companies, they offer development options, right? Like extras.
Precisely. Traditional approaches, coaching, workshops, online courses, they're typically additive. They're extras, things you do on top of your main job.
Right.
But in a DDO, development isn't an add-on. It's like baked right into the culture, the daily routines, the way people interact.
So the workplace itself becomes the primary engine of growth. Is that the idea?
Yeah, think of it maybe as an incubator or like an accelerator for your personal evolution. The environment is intentionally designed to surface your limitations
Okay.
and then support you in working through them. The sources talk about creating a culture that actually prefers bringing your weaknesses out into the open so colleagues can help you overcome them.
Whoa. Making weaknesses public. I mean, in most places, you spend all your energy trying to hide those things. That sounds incredibly vulnerable, maybe even risky.
It absolutely is vulnerable, and that's really key to the shift. It's not just about acquiring new job skills for your career path. It's fundamentally about developing the person who is on that path.
Developing the whole person.
Exactly. The belief is that if you become a more psychologically capable, more self-aware person,
Hmm.
you'll naturally become more effective in your work. Business improvement is seen as a kind of byproduct of human improvement.
Okay, so if that's what a DDO is, let's talk about why. Why is this gaining traction now? What's shifted in the nature of work that makes this developmental focus so critical?
Well, the global economy has gone through this huge transition, right? We've moved from predominantly manufacturing, physical labor, to information and knowledge work, basically, mind work.
So jobs require more thinking, more problem solving, collaboration, all that stuff, more than ever before.
Exactly. And that demands a higher level of psychological complexity
Yeah.
from, well, pretty much everyone at every level.
Okay.
It requires capabilities like innovation, complex problem solving, self-management, personal responsibility, self-direction, skills that aren't typically the main focus in school or on, say, a factory floor.
And the sources point out there's a significant gap here, don't they, between what's needed and where people are at.
They certainly do. Research in adult development theory, which underpins a lot of this, shows a considerable gap between the mental complexity needed for today's challenges,
Right.
especially in leadership roles, which often require what they call a self-authoring or even a self-transforming mind,
Mm-hmm.
and where a large portion of adults currently operate, which is often from a socialized mind. DDOs are specifically designed to actively bridge this gap.
Helping people evolve how they make sense of the world.
Yes, they're trying to accelerate that internal evolution. The socialized mind looks outside for direction, validation. The self-authoring mind has more of an internal compass.
Got it. So DDOs are trying to speed up that shift.
Precisely. Which leads us straight to the how.
Mm.
How do they actually create this kind of environment? What are the foundational principles that make the culture truly developmental?
Yeah, what's the secret sauce?
Well, one of the core principles is this fundamental shift from a culture of performance to a culture of practice.
Okay, performance meaning trying to look good, show off your strengths, hide your mistakes, the usual.
That's the conventional workplace default, isn't it? You optimize for appearing competent and minimizing any missteps. A DDO flips this entirely. It's designed for practice.
Practice.
Yeah, everyone is expected to be in a constant state of learning and growth. There's a great quote mentioned in the sources. The best job is the one you don't yet know how to do.
Huh. Because that's where you're forced to learn and stretch yourself.
Exactly. And essential to practice is feedback. But critically, not just the usual good job or do this better kind of feedback.
Not then.
DDO feedback aims to probe beneath the behavior. It's trying to uncover your underlying assumptions, your mindsets, maybe even your fears.
Wow. Bringing your interior life into the workplace conversation. That sounds pretty intense and maybe a bit intrusive.
It definitely can be intense. And look, it requires a really deep level of trust to work. But the sources argue this is precisely what makes the culture truly developmental.
Because you can't fix what you don't see.
Right. You can't grow past limitations you aren't even aware of, especially the ones rooted deep down in your internal world. Admitting people's interior life is central to this whole model.
Okay, so practice over performance, deep feedback. What holds this potentially intense environment together? It can't just be pressure.
No, absolutely not. It's held together by the concept of community,
Mm.
or what the sources often call home.
Home.
Yeah, the idea that development happens best within communities where people feel deeply valued, are held accountable for their growth, and engage in genuine dialogue. This is where elements like trust, pain, and care come into play.
Trust, pain, and care. Okay, unpack that.
Trust to be vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
The pain, which is the discomfort of facing your limitations, and the care you receive from others to support you through that pain. Sounds like you couldn't really have one without the others working together.
Yeah, they seem interlinked. Vulnerability is key, you said, but it has to be well held. What does that mean exactly?
It means you need to know, deep down, that you are respected and included, even when you're feeling exposed or, making mistakes, even at your worst, basically.
And the pain isn't seen as failure, but as something productive.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Mm.
It's linked to this idea of constructive destabilization. Feeling challenged, uncomfortable, maybe even destabilized is actually a regular part of being in a DDO.
That sounds stressful.
Well, it can be, but it's reframed. It's not
Right.
seen as a threat, but more like labor pains, the necessary discomfort that precedes growth and, a new birth of understanding or capability.
Okay.
The guiding equation they often use is pain plus reflection, progress.
Pain plus reflection equals progress. That feels like the heart of it, doesn't it?
I think so.
Does hierarchy matter much in this kind of culture? Can leaders hide from this process? Or does it apply top down?
What's really striking is that in a DDO, rank does not seem to offer its usual privileges. Senior leaders are just as subject to feedback and challenge, often from people much lower down in the organizational chart.
Right.
Yeah, the sources mention James Coney's experience at Bridgewater. He described his initial surprise when a 25-year-old analyst directly challenged his logic in a meeting.
Wow. I can imagine that would be pretty jarring compared to a typical corporate environment.
He noted that in other places he'd worked, that kind of interaction would be just unthinkable. But at Bridgewater, it wasn't seen as some act of bravery for the junior person. It was framed as their obligation to speak the truth about what they saw, regardless of rank.
Obligation, not bravery. That completely flips the power dynamic.
It really does. And it demands a specific kind of humility from leadership, doesn't it?
Absolutely. What about the time scale? All this reflection and deep feedback, does it slow things down incredibly?
That's a great question.
Mm.
DDOs seem to operate on a different temporal logic for growth. Conventional organizations often prioritize immediate efficiency. Solve the problem quickly, move on.
Right, quick fixes.
DDOs, on the other hand, are willing to invest significant time now to identify and address the underlying human limitations, the root causes that created the problem in the first place.
So they're slower in the short term, maybe, to be faster and more capable in the long term? Is that the trade-off?
Exactly. What might look inefficient day to day is actually an investment in building a more robust, adaptable, and effective system down the road, precisely because they're developing the people who are the system.
Okay. And how do they create the safety needed for people to actually be vulnerable and speak these uncomfortable truths? You mentioned trust, but how is it built?
They create very specific, safe forums designed for speaking the truth. These are structured settings, like the fish bowls at Decurion or diagnosis meetings at Bridgewater.
Okay.
Places where people can discuss the personal dimensions of business issues authentically without fear of, reprisal.
So it's not just airing grievances randomly. It's structured exploration of how people's internal patterns might be contributing to an external problem.
Yes, exactly that. And crucially, the sources stress there's no penalty for participating honestly and openly in these forums. In fact, the penalty might be for failing to participate authentically.
Hmm.
It's about creating and holding that space where people can confront their gaps and defenses, but within that framework of trust and care we talked about.
Okay, this sounds fascinating, but maybe still a bit abstract. Let's get concrete. Let's look at how these principles actually manifest in real companies. The sources give us some vivid glimpses inside three of them. Should we start with Next Jump?
Yeah, next jump. They're a tech company and a prime example. They seem to weave development into almost every process, starting right from hiring.
Their Super Saturday thing.
That's the one. Their Super Saturday interview process is explicitly designed not just to assess skills, but to reveal candidates' backhands.
Backhands, like in tennis. What does that mean here?
Similar idea. It's about your automatic, often unconscious character imbalances. The sources suggest these often manifest as being either sort of overly arrogant or overly insecure. And Next Jump operates on the assumption that basically everyone, including the founders, has a backhand they need to constantly work on.
So hiring isn't just about what you can do, but about identifying your key developmental edge right from day one. And everyone's backhand is known, public.
That seems to be the case, yes. And they actively create opportunities to work on these. The sources tell the story of Nyambusa.
Right.
He apparently struggled with insecurity and public speaking. So to work on this backhand, he volunteered to practice presentations in front of the entire company and specifically asked for feedback.
Wow, that takes guts. He called that an investment in loss, didn't he? That concept from performance coach Josh Waitzkin, that the sources mentioned the idea that you learn more from risks and failures than from easy wins.
Exactly. Nyan apparently learned that exposing his weakness and getting that feedback wasn't humiliating in the end. It was actually a sign that people cared about his growth.
Interesting.
Next Jump also has their Better You initiative, which kind of bakes service into the job itself.
Recognizing that contribution isn't just internal to the company, but outward-facing too.
Yes, and they make it really concrete. In salary reviews, apparently 50% is based on contributions to revenue, but the other 50% is based on contributions to the culture and the development of others.
50-50 split. Wow.
Yeah, it really emphasizes that meaningfulness, connection to service, and personal growth are seen as fundamental parts of being well paid there.
That financial weighting really drives home that the culture is core to the business, not just fluff. Tell us about their follower leader organization model, the FLO thing.
Right, the FLO model. This is Next Jump's system for developing leaders, particularly around their cultural initiatives.
Yeah.
They have these roles like captain, coach, right hand, left hand.
Okay.
And uniquely, the coach role is typically filled by the person who most recently held the captain role for that initiative.
So they've just experienced the challenges themselves and can then coach the new captain through their own struggles with it.
Precisely. And the coach's primary focus isn't just the task. It's helping the new captain develop their specific backhand in the context of leading that initiative.
Got it.
Jackie's story in the sources illustrates this. She coached others specifically to counter her own tendency to just jump in and take over everything.
And what about the daily talking partners ritual? That sounded interesting.
Oh yeah, that's a fascinating daily practice.
Yeah.
Often it's between colleagues who have like complementary backhands, maybe an arrogant type paired with an insecure type. They meet every day.
For the meet, vent, work triangle.
Yes. Meet consistently, vent to clear any frustrations or personal stuff before it festers, and then work, which includes planning the day, but critically, identifying specific opportunities to consciously practice your backhand that very day.
Actively looking for chances to practice.
Right. The Nayan and Venkatesh example shows how they use this time specifically for Nayan to rehearse his presentation and get immediate feedback before doing it for real.
And situational workshops, what are those?
Those are weekly sessions where individuals work with a mentor coach figure. They analyze a specific challenge they face during the week and explore different responses beyond their usual default reactions. The sources say Next Jump actually replaced most traditional manager meetings with these situational workshops, which really indicates how central this reflection and development practice is to their operations.
Yeah, it's less about status updates and much more about processing how you handle situations. How did all of this impact their actual business results? Did it help?
Well, the sources highlight a really significant challenge. NextJump faced around 2010. They had really high engineer turnover, even though they were paying competitive salaries.
Okay, a common tech problem.
Right. But they hypothesized that as they really matured into being a DDO, around 2012 or so, their engineer retention dramatically improved.
Suggesting that the developmental environment itself became a key reason people stayed, that they felt well paid in a different way through growth opportunities.
That seems to be the most plausible explanation offered. They also directly link their business productivity to being what they call a captain creating machine, rapidly developing leaders by pushing authority downwards.
Right.
The Kim and Messenger example, where they transferred significant revenue responsibilities to younger associates, illustrates this belief that developing people is fundamentally how they achieve their business results.
That's a really compelling case from NextJump. Let's turn to Decurion now. They're a different kind of company, family-owned, involved in diverse areas like movie theaters, real estate. How do they live out these DDO principles?
Decurion integrates development into daily routines as well, maybe starting most simply with the practice of check-ins and check-outs in meetings.
Just acknowledging the whole person coming into the room, sorta.
Exactly. It's usually a brief, intentional moment for everyone to share something personal, maybe how they're feeling. It anchors the meeting in the present and reinforces the idea that focusing on mindsets and presence is a regular habit, not something weird.
And it builds community, I imagine.
Definitely. And then there's the fishbowl conversation.
Ah, yes, the fishbowl.
This seems to be a key practice for community learning at Decurion. It's used for working through difficult business issues while simultaneously addressing the personal limitations that might be getting in the way.
How does it work?
Participants sit in inner or outer circles, observing and engaging in a very structured dialogue around a specific topic or challenge.
The sources featured Nora Dashwood's experience with this, didn't they?
They did. Nora, a COO, used a fishbowl to explore her own leadership style. Specifically, she worked on an ingrained assumption from her childhood that she constantly needed to take charge because not leading felt like failing to her. The fishbowl process helped her see how this played out and how she could perhaps trust her team more and allow others to step up rather than feeling she had to do it all.
So it helped her let go of needing to be the indispensable expert. That sounds potentially freeing, but also really challenging for someone used to being in control.
Oh, absolutely challenging. But essential, they argue, for building trust and creating a healthier environment where others can fully contribute their talents, which ultimately leads to better decisions.
Makes sense.
Decurion also has a really unique perspective on success itself. Their president, Christopher Foreman, apparently draws on Viktor Frankl, suggesting that, outcome achievement isn't the ultimate measure.
Really? In a business, what is then?
It's more about how you conduct yourself in the face of challenges. Did you act with courage? Did you care for others? Did you stay true to your values, even if the external outcome wasn't, perfect?
That's a profound reframing of success in a business context. Very different.
It is. And you see this philosophy applied even with entry-level employees, like the crew working at their ArcLight movie theaters.
How so?
They participate in daily huddles, where they don't just get tasks, they discuss the operation as a whole. The philosophy is explicitly stated as, the crew runs the business.
Empowering frontline employees to think like owners, not just rule followers doing a job.
Exactly. And they use things like competency boards, a public tracking system, to recognize and celebrate individual growth and skill acquisition for these crew roles, too.
So development is visible and valued right down to the front line.
Yeah. And this ties into their idea of developmental pulls, meaning giving people challenges that are slightly beyond their current comfort zone based on this underlying belief that people are often 10 times more capable than you might initially assume.
So you trust their potential and provide the stretch needed to reach it. Did this developmental focus have tangible business results at Decurion, like at NextJump?
A really compelling example mentioned is the Hawaii project in their real estate unit. They had these long-standing silo issues between property managers and accountants, a classic business problem.
Okay.
Making people development a core requirement for the project itself forced them to become a more integrated learning community. They had to work together differently.
And that shift in how people interacted actually solved the operational problem. It wasn't just a tech solution or a process change.
According to the sources, yes. This focus on developing the people directly led to overcoming the silos, which in turn created a cheaper cost structure and increased capacity because they developed existing employees rather than just hiring new ones. The business problem was solved through human development.
Wow. Another really strong link between the culture and concrete results. Okay, finally, let's look at Bridgewater Associates, the hedge fund known for its famously intense culture of radical truth.
Right. Bridgewater's environment is really defined by this idea of radical truth and transparency. The sources describe walking through their headquarters with floor-to-ceiling glass walls. The transparency is both physical and symbolic.
Sunlight as the best disinfectant, maybe?
Something like that. And their culture is built on this relentless, almost algorithmic search for truth, including, crucially, uncomfortable truths about oneself and others' limitations and mistakes. Bridgewater leadership explicitly believes this culture is the cause of their investment success.
Okay, how is this put into practice day to day? It sounds potentially brutal.
Well, a core process is called diagnosis. It's not just about solving problems, it's about getting to the absolute root causes, viewing every outcome, good or bad, as the product of a system, or what they call a machine.
The machine metaphor, like the Sergio example, the guy who was a people pleaser and produced the bad slide deck.
Exactly. The diagnosis didn't just stop at the slides were bad. It explored why Sergio, with his specific people-pleasing tendency, produced them. It forces everyone to look beyond the symptom to the underlying patterns in the person or the system.
Okay.
For someone operating from, say, that socialized mind we mentioned, this process forces them to see cause and effect within the organizational system.
And for someone maybe with a more self-authoring mind, what does it push them towards?
It pushes them to examine the machine itself, their own personal system of operation, their own internal processes, their biases, and take responsibility for producing the outcome. The underlying belief is that the machine, whether personal or organizational, can always be debugged and improved.
And pain plus reflection, progress is central here too, presumably.
Oh, absolutely. Bridgewater is known for being extremely challenging. Confronting inconsistencies or pushing people to rigorously examine their assumptions often causes significant discomfort pain.
Right.
The Woody example in the sources shows this. His initial defensiveness when challenged is presented as a natural reaction, but the key is reflecting on that pain to understand the underlying fear or assumption, which is essential for growth.
They also rely heavily on their principles document, right?
Yes, it's like their operating manual. It's a living document, constantly referred to, debated, updated. It captures the learning from past mistakes and enshrines the expectation that while making mistakes is okay, even expected, failing to identify, analyze, and learn from them is absolutely not acceptable.
Okay. Tell me about the baseball card. That sounds uniquely Bridgewater.
It really does. It's essentially a public digital profile for every single employee. It aggregates multiple data streams like feedback dots from colleagues on specific traits, entries from issue logs, results from personality assessments, peer reviews.
So a comprehensive, transparent, data-driven map of your strengths and weaknesses visible to everyone.
Exactly that. It's designed to close the gap between how you perceive yourself and how your colleagues actually perceive you based on observed behavior and results.
Wow.
This data then allows for targeted learning or, importantly, for guardrailing, knowing where you personally have blind spots and need others to watch out for you or compensate. Even the most senior leaders have these cards, showing both reliable strengths and known areas to watch out for.
And the issue logs and dot collector are the systems feeding into that baseball card.
Yes, precisely. They are real-time systems for raising issues, giving feedback, the dots, and flagging problems. The example of Rohit, a relatively junior person, challenging Alex, a senior manager, about his reliance on consultants via the issue log,
Right.
shows how these systems are designed to enable truth to be spoken across hierarchy, prompting necessary, if sometimes difficult, conversations about things like defensiveness or ineffective strategies.
And the daily case. What's that?
These are short, often multimedia case studies, maybe video clips of actual meetings or interactions that illustrate the principles in action. They're reviewed daily across the firm, almost like calisthenics of the culture, helping everyone practice applying the principles to real-world situations constantly.
Okay. So these are three very different companies: tech, diversified family business, hedge fund, but they clearly share these underlying principles and some pretty intense practices, all aimed at integrating development right into the core of how work gets done.
Absolutely. And the sources make a very powerful argument that this isn't just, accidental or incidental. These practices align quite directly with what we understand from adult development theory.
Ah, okay. Reconnecting back to those stages we touched on earlier, the socialized, self-authoring, and self-transforming minds.
Yes. The argument is that DDOs are such effective incubators for growth because their core practices provide the specific kinds of challenges and supports needed for adults to actually move through these developmental stages. It's not random, it's targeted.
How do specific practices link to specific stages then? Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about the kind of continuous feedback that probes mindsets, or the expectation at Bridgewater that you must rigorously justify your reasoning. These practices directly challenge the socialized mind's tendency to rely on external authority or group consensus.
Okay.
They nudge it towards developing a more internal compass, a coherent personal framework, which is the hallmark of the self-authoring mind.
Right.
Then things like Bridgewater's machine metaphor, which forces you to see your own role in creating systemic outcomes, or Decurian's fishbowls that explore multiple complex perspectives simultaneously, can push a self-authoring mind towards the self-transforming stage.
Which is more about seeing systems holding paradox.
Exactly. Seeing that even your own internal machine is a system that can be questioned and evolved. And even something like the huddles at ArcLight helps move entry-level employees from focusing solely on their immediate task, pre-socialized perhaps, towards understanding their connection to the broader team and operation, fostering that sense of collective identity characteristic of the socialized mind stage.
So the DDO model is almost like applied developmental psychology, systematically embedded within the workplace culture.
That's a good way to put it. That's certainly the argument the sources make. They are providing the necessary conditions for growth, the optimal heat and light, tailored to different developmental levels.
This all sounds incredibly demanding, though. Facing your backhand, public weaknesses, constant probing feedback, structured truth-telling. I mean, if it's so powerful, why aren't more companies doing this? What's the big barrier?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The sources address this head-on with the concept of immunity to change, developed by Robert Kegan and Lisa Lahey, who are also key researchers behind the DDO concept.
Immunity to change? The idea that we often don't change, not just because we lack willpower, but because we have these hidden, unconscious commitments that actively work against our stated goals.
Exactly that. We have these hidden commitments often driven by underlying big assumptions about ourselves and the world that cause us to, sensibly, from our own internal logic, engage in behaviors that sabotage our best intentions.
Sensibly sabotage. How does that work?
Or protecting ourselves, often from deeply held fears of inadequacy maybe, or vulnerability, or loss of control, or rejection. So the very things we do, or maybe don't do, that prevent us from reaching our improvement goal actually make perfect rational sense from the perspective of protecting ourselves from these bigger fears.
Ah, okay. So your strategy to protect yourself inadvertently creates or maintains the very problem you say you want to solve.
Precisely. It's a hidden dynamic. And the value of a method like the immunity to change mapping process is that it makes these hidden internal dynamics the competing commitment, the big assumption, visible, conscious, and therefore potentially workable.
It brings the unconscious conflict into consciousness so you can actually look at it and maybe start to test those big assumptions.
Yes. And the sources contrast this proactive approach with simply waiting to learn only from mistakes. Waiting for a screw-up is often costly, it's slow, and frankly, the moment you've just failed isn't always the ideal psychological state for deep, reflective learning.
Right, you're probably defensive or upset.
Exactly. ITC helps you identify your growing edge, the boundary of your current meaning-making, and work on it proactively, ideally without causing significant damage first.
The sources mention some companies that use this ITC method, right?
Oh,
Even
really?
if they aren't full DDOs.
Yes, they gave several examples, like XYZ, a company using it broadly. Fraser and Dieter, an accounting firm, where partners used ITC to tackle common professional services challenges like difficulty delegating or struggling to see others' perspectives under pressure.
Right, the Susan Kashoa example?
Yeah, Susan working on delegating despite her deep anxiety about relinquishing control and things going wrong, and Charlotte Trailer using it to better understand and respond to colleagues' viewpoints during stressful, busy seasons rather than just getting frustrated.
And Flashpoint, the startup accelerator, their findings sounded important.
Yes, Flashpoint found that even when startup founders have a crystal clear view of market reality, the team's ability to actually adapt and succeed often hinges on addressing their collective immunity to change map.
So the team's internal dynamics are key.
Exactly. The startup stream can only become reality, they found, if the team works through its inherent self-protective patterns that might otherwise prevent necessary pivots or actions. Mindset change was crucial.
Okay, we've covered what DDOs are, how they seem to work, seen some compelling examples, looked at the underlying theory, and understood this immunity to change barrier. Now for the really big question, the bottom line. Does being a DDO simply, coexist with business success? Does it contribute to it? Or does it actually cause it?
Right. This is maybe the most provocative point the authors came to after doing all their research and analysis. They said they initially thought DDOs proved you could be successful while also focusing deeply on development. A possibility proof.
Okay, that sounds reasonable, but they went further.
They did. Their final analysis led them to a much stronger, more controversial conclusion
Which was?
that the DDO model, the culture itself, is the primary cause of their sustained success.
Wow. The cause. That's a very bold statement. What's the strongest evidence they offer for that?
Well, Bridgewater's co-CEO at the time, Greg Jensen, is quoted being absolutely unequivocal about it. He states, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, "We do not think of our culture as merely a contributor to our business success. We think of it as literally the cause of our success. We think of the culture as itself our business strategy." Full stop.
Full stop. Okay.
He links it directly to their ability to cultivate the independent thinking, the humility, the accuracy, the ability to disagree, well, all things absolutely essential to thrive in the competitive financial markets they operate in.
And we saw pretty strong causal links in the other examples too, didn't we?
Absolutely. The Curian's Hawaii project seems like a textbook case, where the focus on people development directly solved the operational silo issues and improved the cost structure. That wasn't a side effect, it was the solution.
Right.
At ArcLight, developing the crew members enabled them to literally run the business more effectively, leading directly to better operational results. Next, Jump's hypothesis is that becoming a DDO solved their critical engineer turnover crisis, and their productivity is explicitly tied to their ability to rapidly develop leaders, their captain-creating machine.
Mm-hmm.
And even Fraser and Dieter explicitly sees people development as fundamental to their professional services business model, stating clearly that the increased openness and awareness gained through things like ITC has a huge impact on the business.
So the argument isn't really that you can't be successful without being a DDO. Obviously, many companies are. But maybe that if your goal is deep integrated people development alongside high performance, the DDO model provides a powerful pathway where the development directly fuels the performance.
That seems to be the core takeaway on the business value proposition. The development isn't happening despite the business demands or alongside them. It's actually how the business meets those demands more effectively and sustainably over time.
Okay, this has been a really deep dive into a truly, transformative way of thinking about work and organizations. But let's face it, for most people listening, their workplace probably isn't a full-fledged DDO. So what can you realistically take away from all this right now and maybe apply in your own life or even within your current, more traditional organization?
That's a great question. And the sources do offer several actionable practices, things you can try even outside formal DDO structure. One simple one is finding or consciously becoming a developmental buddy.
Like that talking partner idea, someone you can have that co-mentorship with, create a small, safe home where you can share what you're genuinely working on, your backhand.
Exactly. Building that mini community of mutual trust and support.
Yeah.
Another key one is actively seeking out feedback. Maybe asking for it more specifically, and perhaps even more challenging, practicing giving feedback that tries to probe mindsets, not just critique surface behavior.
Pushing gently past the easy surface stuff to get to potentially deeper insights, even if it feels awkward at first.
Right. And related to that is dedicating time to practice reflection yourself.
Right.
Try to consciously identify your own underlying assumptions, your own backhand, that core pattern you tend to default to under stress or pressure.
And the sources mentioned the immunity to change mapping process is something you can actually do personally, right? To map your own hidden commitments.
Yes, absolutely. It's a powerful tool for self-understanding, for seeing your own self-sabotage patterns and identifying your truest, most potent growing edge right now.
What else?
Also, look for opportunities, however small, to create little home-like communities or pockets of psychological safety within your existing team or organization. Spaces where maybe a bit more vulnerability and truth can be held safely.
And speaking up seems crucial too, based on the DDO examples.
Absolutely. Find moments, find the courage to speak up, share your genuine perspective, make your passions or concerns visible to others, including those in positions of power. The sources suggest assuming they might actually be open to joining you in your interests or concerns, rather than assuming they won't be.
Interesting. And finally, maybe asking more developmental questions, either of yourself or perhaps cautiously of your colleagues or manager.
Yes, the sources suggest framing questions around development, like, does my organization or my team help me identify a specific personal challenge to work on? Are others around me aware of, and do they genuinely care about, my growth edge? Am I given support or resources to overcome those limitations? Do I actively get to work on this edge regularly as part of my actual job? And maybe, is my growth actually recognized and celebrated in some way?
Hmm. Just asking those questions, even internally, could start shifting the focus, couldn't it? Even just on your own team.
They absolutely can. Even small steps towards incorporating some of these practices can begin to unlock a more developmental, more meaningful experience in your work life wherever you are.
So, we've taken quite a journey today, a deep dive into this radical idea of deliberately developmental organizations. We've seen how companies like NextJump, Decurion, and Bridgewater are attempting to weave personal growth and business strategy into, well, all one thing.
Yeah, and it's clear this path isn't the easy route. It demands facing your limitations, embracing vulnerability, allowing for that constructive destabilization, the pain we talked about. Bringing your full, messy humanity to work requires significant effort and courage, no doubt.
But the sources argue quite powerfully that this is the path to unlocking profound potential, both individually and collectively. It's not just about fixing weaknesses, but about transformation.
They even quote the poet Rumi, suggesting that maybe even your dark thought, the shame, the malice, should be welcomed at the door because each difficulty, each guest has been sent as a guide from beyond.
Hmm.
In a DDO, perhaps the very pain of struggling well, when it's held within a caring, reflective community, is seen precisely as that guide the path towards new life, new capabilities, becoming more of who you could be.
Which brings us back to maybe a deeper definition of happiness, doesn't it? Not just pleasure or the absence of pain, but maybe the ongoing process of your own unfolding and becoming.
Exactly. That Aristotelian idea of eudaimonia, of human flourishing. Perhaps, as these DDOs suggest, the very pain of growth, when it's embraced and supported within a community, is the paradoxical guide you need to become the person you're truly meant to be. And maybe, just maybe, unlocking unexpected levels of success, both personally and professionally, along the way.
Thanks for listening. Visit our library and subscribe below for more book summaries. This has been a Sprint Reads production.